Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I am your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today. On today's podcast, I want to focus about the upcoming G7 conference, which will be happening in Kananaskis, Alberta. Not the first time it's there, but we'll get to that in just a couple of seconds. This is a big deal. Anytime world leaders get together and talk about the economy and global issues and tariffs, it is a big deal. But obviously, because of what's been going on in the world and the global economies and the North American economies over the last little while, this one seems to take on special significance. Now, these people meet on a regular basis. And just to backtrack, the G7, by the way, or Group of Seven, officially, actually was formed in 1973, and then it was just a bunch of meeting of finance ministers, but it's elevated itself now to the world leaders, the presidents, the prime ministers, the chancellors, whomever of the various member countries meet on a pretty regular basis. So those member countries, by the way, are Canada, of course, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the USA. The European Union is a kind of an honorary member. I don't think they have voting privileges, but they'll be there too. And it's an area where we get together, they get together, and they talk about the issues that matter to our global economy. And it couldn't be more important than it is these days because of what we've gone through over the last 4 or 5 years. Sidebar issue here, Kananaskis, Alberta is not a major city. It's a nice resort, by the way, some distance away from Calgary. Smartly, the G7 and G20 members, for that matter, some years ago decided to move away from large cities for these conferences for security reasons more than anything else. I don't need to remind too many people, I'm sure, of the 2010 G20 meeting in Toronto, which turned into riots around the streets, some questionable police procedures, people being arrested without cause. It was a mess. And that's happened in other major cities in past conferences. So they move it off to places like Kananaskis. Deerhurst in northern Ontario, not too far from Huntsville, had a conference like this some years ago. And it's to create some distance, I guess. Now, that's not to say there won't be protesters, because there will be. Anytime world leaders get together, protesters are not far behind. And there will be protests. You can count on that. With, as you might expect, the usual people with the usual beefs and concerns. Trump and his policies, both internally and externally, of course. Russian and Ukraine, Israel-Hamas situation, of course, that's going to come up. Alberta separation is going to be held in Alberta, so you know that they're going to have a platform there. And usually when you have these conferences, some of the protesters who show up are just anarchists who just love to stir it up. For no particular reason. They're just anti-establishment, anti-government, anti-everything. And they'll be there too. So that's happening. And what they've tried to do here, the authorities and the security folks, is set up special zones for those protests, try to control them certainly, and try to mitigate any potential damage that could come. So we'll see how that goes. Some with different levels of success. But more importantly, I want to concentrate not on that aspect of it, but on who is going to be there and what they're going to be talking about. When you have a conference in your country, as we are this time around, Mark Carney, as the Prime Minister of this country, has the opportunity to invite other guests. And he has done that. And of course, that's never without some controversy. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the President of Ukraine, will be there. They're not a member, certainly, but they're certainly a central player in what's going on with the global economies and the global politic these days. So he will be attending. One of the other controversial invitations, of course, was to the Indian Prime Minister, Modi, who will be there. Now, India is not a member of the G7. They are a member of the G20, but there's a reason for this invitation, and also an invitation that was extended to the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed Salam. And some people have raised eyebrows and some serious concerns about that too. But I want to put that in context here. I read an interesting op-ed piece by Zachary Pakin, who was a senior fellow at the Institute for Peace and Diplomacy, who I think just kind of laid it on the line. Zach's pretty good at just bottom lining an awful lot of stuff. And he says, look, at the overwhelming majority of governments in the world do not share the capitalist, small L liberal view of Western societies and nations, such as Canada, the United States, the UK, etc. So you can't simply say, well, we're higher and mighty than those people that are doing these sorts of things like in Saudi Arabia and India because there are human rights concerns, etc. you can't ignore them. Because if you do, then you run the risk of isolating yourself. And if Canada were to further isolate itself from some of these other countries and some of their economic policies, that pretty much puts us at the mercy of Donald Trump. I mean, it's only our old ally and not much of an ally these days, too. So I think it makes sense, even though you may have to hold your nose. And I'm not suggesting that there won't be any discussion about some of the human rights concerns with those two countries and those two areas. That's probably going to come up. But at the same time, you can't have a discussion about global economics and moving forward without India and without Saudi Arabia. They're both players. And this is all about players getting together and talking about this, not putting aside their differences. You have to understand it, and you have to recognize who is who and what they're responsible for. But at the same time, everybody should be at the table, because everybody can have an impact on this. So I think it's a smart move on Carney's part to invite them to this particular conference. Now, by the way, I don't know if the Saudi Crown Prince is even going to come. He has been invited, but we'll see what happens with that. But it's important for that very reason, because we need to have some similarities, I think, between some of these policies that are going on. Carney and others have talked about, it's about time for countries to diversify with their economic policies. You can't rely on one particular partner, as we have, for instance, here in Canada with the United States for the last little while. Carney has talked about diversifying and dealing with the European Union, with Japan and other nations to that end of the globe, and Scandinavia, etc. Well, this is the time to start sowing the seeds for those sorts of economic policies and those sort of partnerships. So this is a very important time to get together. And that's why the context of what's going to be done here, I think, is so very important. And Carney has already talked about what they're going to be discussing here. And I don't know if there's going to be consensus. Probably not. There's usually a communique at the end of these meetings to say, here's what we talked about and here's what we found agreement on. It's not usually earth-shaking. It's not the sort of thing they're going to say, boy, nobody saw that coming. Everything's going to be okay now. But it's a matter of setting policies and, I think, developing partnerships for this. And that's what I think is so important here. It's all about investment. And Carney has talked about this, and we've talked about this on the podcast. If Canada wants to start getting back on its own feet economically without having to rely solely on the United States, we need to attract investment. And not just from the United States, but investment from India and from Saudi Arabia and other areas that see Canada as an opportunity. Nobody's going to invest in anything, any country, unless they see a return on that investment. And we need to prove to those countries that we have that opportunity, that we have an economy that will guarantee a return on investment. And that's what we're looking for right now. It's not an easy task. And frankly, something that the Canadian governments of the past have really dropped the ball on. Figuring, oh, well, we've got the United States beside us here. Everything's going to be cool. Well, no, it's not. We know that to be the case now. So it's very, very important that we develop these discussions with Modi. I know Canada and India right now have a lot of concerns and accusations that have been leveled, not just by the former prime minister, but also, of course, by our security agencies about Indian government involvement in the murder of an activist in this country, a Canadian who was an activist in this country who was killed some months ago. That's a real situation and something that needs to be dealt with. But you can't simply say, well, we're not going to play ball with you because of that. We have to basically work on two different fields here in dealing with those issues. And you can't have Canada's economy suffer as a result. You can't just turn your back or a blind eye to some of these other countries. And I'm glad that others seem to realize that. And there's always going to be some political opposition to these things, but you have to look at the greater good here too. And something comes out of this that's going to help us. I think that's what we have to be shooting for here. The whole concept of what we're going to be looking for here, though, is some, if not unanimity, but some consensus in moving forward and developing some of these deals. As a matter of fact, even quite frankly, the Canada-U.S. situation. Tariffs are a problem. And by the way, not just tariffs between Canada and the U.S. The U.K. has a tariff problem with the United States. Other jurisdictions do as well. And we've got to understand that there's got to be some dialogue on this. Now, Trump is going to be there, and I don't necessarily feel, there's going to be some monumental agreement between Canada and the United States with trade deals or to do with tariffs. That's probably not going to come out of this G7 meeting. But there seems to be some feeling and some consensus now that there has been enough discussion between the two countries that maybe there might be the bones of an agreement there. And it's necessarily going to be signed there, but you want to create some goodwill. Is somebody who needs to be dealt with. You can't ignore him. You can't ignore the buffoonery. I understand that. And the fact that he just seems to fly off the handle sometimes. But at the same time, for better or worse, I think it's worse, he is the leader of the United States of America. And they're a big player. They're the big dog in this fight for economic reasons and so many other reasons. So there has to be some sort of relationship with Trump and the Canadian government. That's gone sour over the last little while. As a matter of fact, there's strong evidence to suggest that maybe one of the reasons it went sour was at one of these previous meetings. I guess it was back around 2018 in Charlottesville, Quebec, where Trump actually had to leave early and never did sign the communique that the other world leaders would sign on to. But before, as Trump has wanted to do, before he got on his plane and took off, he made some rather bold, meandering statements about how things were great between Canada and the U.S. and all these trade deals are going to be worked out and it's all going to be great. We're really anticipating that. Well, he was in midair, I guess, on his way to wherever he was going. And Trudeau spoke up and said, no, it wasn't that way at all. We got a long way to go here. There's no agreements on anything. Well, that apparently really pissed off Trump. And if there ever was any kind of a relationship between Trudeau and Trump, it was destroyed that day and only got worse as time went on. Now, contrast that with what seems to be at least a respect by Donald Trump for the Canadian government and for Mark Carney. And that's a good start. You need some sort of a foundation for that. Can they build on that? Well, we certainly hope so. And this meeting in Kananaskis in Alberta may be an important stepping stone in trying to find that sort of agreement. So there's a lot at stake here. And not just for Canada and the U.S., but for Canada's role on the global scene as well, with G20, with G7, and certainly with NATO, too. These things are all tied together. When we talk about things like increasing our defense spending and security and things of that nature, there's an economic ring to everything there. And a lot of that is going to be discussed and maybe the foundation laid for that at this meeting. So we're going to be paying very close attention to what they're going to be talking about and what they're going to be saying and watching closely to see the interaction that goes on between these world leaders. It's an opportunity for Prime Minister Carney, too. Now, he's not a new player to global politics, of course, not just because of his time with the Bank of Canada or with the Bank of England, but he's been a player on the global economic scene for years now, involved with the G7 and G20, sat on a number of committees, chaired a number of those committees. So he's not new to these people. A lot of these world leaders that we're talking about, Macron and others, they know this guy and they've dealt with him in the past. But now, he's in the big chair. The United States has hosted this in the past, but this is Canada's turn. Canada is the president, I guess, of the G7 this particular time around, which is why the conference is going to be held here in Canada. So Carney gets to set the agenda, and we'll be looking with great anticipation to see just how they can move forward on some of these issues. Some goodwill and hopefully some positive vibes coming out of this to try to get us out of this economic and quagmire that seems to be festering right now because of some of the things that are going on worldwide and of course, within the United States, which are going to have an impact on us too. So, big deal. And of course, we want to talk about this on the podcast in the days and weeks ahead and try to see just what sort of ramifications are going to follow after this meeting in Alberta. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks so much for being with us. Of course, you can pick us up. If you're new to the podcast, welcome aboard. Good to have you with us today. You can find us on just about any platform where you get your podcasts. And we always look forward to your feedback on this as well. Let us know what you think. Give us some feedback, some ideas, exchange of opinions. That's what dialogue is all about. That's how we get this exchange of ideas. And hopefully it can broaden our horizons about some of these key discussions. We look forward to that. And don't forget, as you go through some of the podcasts, we'll also have background information and links to those background pieces as well. So make sure you check those out too to kind of enhance the discussion that we're going to have over the next little while. Thanks as always to Madeline Kelly for the great work producing the podcast today. I'm Bill Kelly. Until next time, stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.